Hello and welcome to this MCMA webinar on total cost of ownership versus total cost of acquisition. My name is Radhi Jagadar and I'm a marketing manager for the Association for Advancing Automation. I would like to introduce Joanna Keel, our new marketing and membership manager for MCMA. Joanna will share some key information at the end of this webinar. This webinar will be recorded and an email with a link to the recording will be sent to you within the next 24 hours. If you have any questions during this webinar, please submit them in the chat panel of the webinar screen, and we will answer all questions by email after the conclusion of today's presentation. I'd now like to introduce our webinar presenter today, Kristen Lewatsky. A certified hardware geek, Kristen Lewatsky has written about technology for more than 18 years. She has degrees in physics and engineering and was part of the team that fabricated the mirrors for NASA's Chandra X-ray telescope. After her stint as an engineer, she switched to writing about technology. She has covered automation for MCMA for 9 years. Her other areas of specialization include memory, microelectronics, nanotechnology, biotech, photonics, and computer hardware and software. I'd now like to hand it over to Kristen to get started.
Thanks, Radhi. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Let's talk about TCO versus TCA. It's an area that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I've been covering this space, as she mentioned, for quite a while. And when I first started writing in the area, there was a lot of talk about smart components, yay, everything that they could do. And I really covered a lot of sort of the base technology. But over about the past year and a half, it seems like more and more I find myself focusing on the end-using side of things. So not just that you've got smart drives and safety PLCs and all of that, but what can that do for you as far as productivity, as far as decreasing downtime, increasing uptime, helping with energy management, all that sort of thing. And it's pretty powerful technology, but what's interesting to me is something that I've heard a lot about is talking with companies. I always want to know what's reality. We're always covering the cutting edge journalistically because that's the exciting stuff. That's where the hot things are going on. But the question is, how much is it really getting used out there? And obviously it's going to vary. You're going to have your early adopters in things like semiconductor and pharmaceutical, and more materials processing is going to stick with the tried and true. But what I heard for quite a while was that, yeah, there's this great stuff out there, but you have a lot of companies that are reluctant to make the additional investment. And there's kind of the whole push me, pull you of cost of acquisition versus cost of operations, because it's probably going to cost more up front to go ahead and build these machines. But long term, you're going to get savings. And so what I started thinking about was just looking into more, what are the arguments? What's the status out there in radio land as far as whether end users are getting it, and are there ways to help it happen more effectively? So first thing, obviously, we should start out with cost of acquisition. And there are a lot of nuances to that. I mean, the obvious cost of acquisition is the check that you write to the company that's supplying you the machine builder or the OEM, but it's a lot more that goes into that acquisition than that. You've got all the planning, you've got engineering hours at the end user side of things, you've got work that's got to go into health and safety considerations. Yes, you buy the equipment, getting it where it's going, getting it installed and commissioned, which can be lengthy, and it's got to be, you've got to have your staff trained and get everything up and running, so by no means trivial. And then the flip side is, after you make that acquisition, you've got the cost of operation going forward. Obviously, that's going to involve powering the whole thing, but there are also many other factors, including things like cleaning, sanitization, maintenance, obviously operators, ongoing training, that sort of thing. But this is the part where things start getting kind of interesting, which is what can motion control do to drop those numbers and make it so that perhaps putting in some extra money up front with a TCA gives you better TCO numbers that are ultimately going to save the organization over time. It's a tricky subject because you've got a number of stakeholders involved in every organization that are kind of fighting over budget, fighting over making these decisions. Nobody can really come to an agreement on exactly what TCO is and what constitutes enough or not enough. So before we go into the functionality of the different stakeholders, just a quick kind of reminder of the whole OEE thing, since that is kind of the fundamental underpinning of anything that goes on in manufacturing. What can you do to push good product out the door? Are you able to keep uptime, avoid unscheduled downtime? Are you putting out the product the way you expect to? Are you putting out good parts or good products? So that's always going to be first and foremost on the mind of people who are in the top line of fire. The biggest challenge that goes on with this whole TCO, TCA thing is because you've got a bunch of different stakeholders involved, and in some ways they're all kind of silo situation. I mean, you've got the plant manager, plant or factory, whatever. I mean, the names change company to company. Everybody I talk to has different ranges, but then you've got the engineering people who are focused on tech, and you also have purchasing, and that's the person that's going to be making decisions about what actually gets bought. Everybody's got different mandates. They're not necessarily all in the same room when it comes time to make a decision. So what I'm sort of hoping to talk about today is how do you break up that disconnect? How do you get people communicating in a way that's most effective for the organization as a whole and long term? And part of the issue that you've got going on is, as I say, it's conflicting. Your plant manager, what they want to do is have the organization and the facility running most effectively. They want to keep people safe. They want to put out good product, but they also want to do it cost effectively. They're going to be looking very closely at whether the machines are up and running. They're going to be looking closely at energy consumption, things like that kind of all feed into the bottom line. Your operations manager, they're going to be caring about that even more so. How do we get more parts out per minute? How do we make sure that the line is up and running? How do we keep that OEE going? So those guys are not probably going to be all as obsessed with what the latest and greatest auto-tuning servo is going to do, except to the extent that it can go ahead and help the machines work better and minimize downtime. The next level down, and this is where it gets tricky when you're talking with your end users, you've got engineering, but you've got a bunch of different levels of engineering. It's not just one type. You've got like a CPG company, you've got your automation engineers, you've got your packaging engineers. They don't necessarily look at the same thing or focus on the same sets of priorities. So you kind of have some even disconnects there going on among those groups. But they care about equipment. They want everything to be working right. They want effective performance. And then you flip, you've got maintenance in there. They want to keep everything up and running. They want faster diagnostics. They want streamlined repairs. And that's where motion control has answers for all of this. Motion control has the energy transparency technology or monitoring capabilities. They can give all the information to your ops manager and plant manager. You've got shop floor to top floor capabilities. For these engineering folks, you've got the smart components that can do onboard diagnostics. They can go ahead and flag when there are issues coming up, let people know about where in advance, etc. So motion control definitely has answers for all of that, and reduce downtime, optimize quality. Now on the supply side, then you're talking about technology providers, OEMs, that kind of thing. Those folks are out there worrying about good technology, good products, good machines. But again, you've got to figure out how to get the message across to the end user. The interesting thing about all of it is at the very end, the person who makes a decision is your purchasing person. It's, purchasing manager, purchasing director. They have a very different mandate than all of the above. Nominally, their mandate is to save the, be a good custodian of the company's resources. So what they're trying to do is not just get the cheapest thing around, but make effective buying decisions. So they're not going to be performance driven with respect to things like the energy saving technologies and so on that are available from motion control. If they're not educated on that and they don't understand how that feeds into the greater mandate of the company as a whole, they may not be taking that into account because, again, they're looking at taking care of the numbers. They care about things like logistics. They care about whether they can find spares. How much is it going to cost to have spares? If a machine's got 50 axes and 40 different motors, that's going to be a real different value prop than if the machine's got 10 different motors because they've rescaled it so you don't have to have as much sparing. I mean, little factors, but that kind of stuff adds up. So that's, they're looking at things from a very different picture than just performance. Now, as I mentioned, motion control has big answers for all of that. In particular, you've got many vendors out there these days have got some kind of visibility or transparency software that allows the end user to see exactly where energy is being consumed. They can go ahead and manage their operations, maybe push operations that draw a lot of power into off-peak hours to cut their peak usage rates, which goes directly to scaling the usage for the following quarter. And that's something certainly your manager types up front that we were talking about. They're going to be happy about those numbers. Self-monitoring components, where you got some of these smart drives that are able to go ahead and even some encoders that are able to go ahead and send flags if there are any issues going on so that people know in advance where problems are coming up. You've got safety-enabled drives and PLCs that are able to help target things. So it's no longer if you've got 100 axis, 100-foot-long paper or printing press that's got a whole bunch of doors and one of them's open somewhere and you can't figure out where. These days you've got equipment where you can find that, so you don't have nearly as much time lost to downtime and just trying to sleuth out where the problems are. So that's all helpful. Shared power buses, same thing. You help reduce some of your power draw, so that helps your utility numbers. Again, makes management happy. Yay! But the problem with all of this is that many of these components cost a little bit more, and that's where your purchasing person is going back to their fundamental mandate, which is save the company money. And the question is, how do you educate them so that they're paying attention to the fact that even though, it's that saying you've got to spend money to make money, that even though they might have a slightly higher capital outlay, there's savings to be had all the way up and down the food chain. So ultimately, the company will do better off. So how do you get the message across? Well, one of the things that tends to work with a lot of sort of philosophies out there is you need an in-house corporate champion. You need somebody who's paying attention. Your management cares a lot about savings. That's something that they're directly paying attention to. So if you are an end user, you're somebody in the engineering levels where you really want this technology, part of what you need to be thinking about is communicating with those folks, getting across to them the value proposition. The thing is, it's really easy to get caught up in technology. I love hardware. Nothing makes me happier, but unless you're somebody who's wired like that, that's not necessarily going to get across to you. It's certainly not going to get across to CIO, CTO types. But if you can go ahead and make an argument on how much the company is going to save money by making this change, then that's going to get you somewhere. And maybe that means that you have to go to your OEM and to your system house or technology provider to get some of those numbers. But if you've got something solid, they're going to listen. That was as part of the run-up to preparing for this webcast. I also have been writing an article for the MCMA website on this same topic, and I talked to, I think, 5 people who wound up being about the topic. And one of the people mentioned, it's easy to say, oh, you're going to save X percent, but you know what? That's not really going to mean anything to these guys. What they want to hear is numbers. And especially if you're talking to purchasing, they're looking in terms of, they want hard numbers. They're looking at hard timelines. So they're focusing on, I've got a 3 to 5 year window, and I've got to make a purchasing decision here. If you're going to tell me that we're going to save money by buying this technology, give me hard numbers. Tell me how much we're really going to save over those 5 years. Saving 1 or 2%. I don't know what that means. If you can give it to me as hard numbers, that makes a big difference. Now, kind of an addendum in there. It's interesting. Something else that came up in these conversations is, to a certain extent, how much companies pay attention to this tends to be scaled by the size. So small, medium-sized organizations may not be so focused on some of the energy-saving prospects, but if you've got major food and beverage companies or something, 1% savings on energy bill over the course of a year, that winds up being an enormous amount of money for them. So, part of it is a matter of kind of choosing your targets and so on. The other thing to do is really focus on education. This is going to kind of have to be one of these social things. I'm assuming I'm mostly talking to engineering types out there. And I had to laugh because one of the guys I was talking to said, we're not really good at like bonding and communicating, but that's what you got to get out and do. You've got to talk to the people in your organization, and that includes purchasing, because you've got to make the case for them so that they really understand the value prop, because no one's going to do that for you. And they're going to be looking at it in general from the context that they've had long term and that they know. So in order to convince them to look at things differently, you've really got to make that connection for them. And maybe that means that you drag them to a trade show and you walk around, you get them some numbers, you do things to convince them. But the other part is it's important to also talk to folks in the engineering staff, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You've got a lot of different layers of engineering, and if you're an automation engineer and you're talking to other automation engineers, you know, you're going to be fine talking about all the different aspects of, you know, auto-tuning drives or some of the energy monitoring capabilities and so on. You're talking to somebody who's more on the packaging side of things. They're really worried about materials and logistics and so on. You're going to need to not just explain some of the details so much as show them the value proposition, show them why it matters to them. And it seems like sort of one of those oh so obvious things, but it's really easy to forget because if it's transparent to you, you can kind of lose track of the fact that it's not getting across to anyone else. And the best way to get people to see the light and accept that you are a visionary is to give them the tools to do that. So, and one of the obvious things that people may need to be reminded of, you know, again, if you're maybe talking about purchasing and so on, when we're talking about TCO, we're talking long term. I mean, machine frames, I've talked to people who have frames and bases that they've had in their factory for 50 years. Those things last forever, but the electronics, the rule of thumb I heard for a long time was 10 years, but I've been talking to people here lately who are saying, you know, 15 and even 20 years. It depends. So if you're making this TCA investment, yeah, maybe it's going to cost a little bit more, but look at how long you're going to be saving money over that. So another thing that somebody mentioned to me in the course of research is that CapEx money is getting a little bit easier to find. Since the recession has eased off, and organizations are really starting to think a little bit more in terms of making investments and getting what's necessary to do the job. And in particular, I remember years ago talking with somebody in a business context, and they were talking about the value of things like corporate jets as a capital investment, not as a efficiency or anything like that, but just that it means that it sends the message that the company is at a certain level of competition and solidity and so on. So spending extra money to get the right set of equipment, making the right decisions to set the company up for future success, those are messages that the shareholders want to hear. So, to that extent, it's getting a little easier to get the money out there, and if you can make that long-term argument, then you're going to go ahead and get good responses. Because the other thing to keep in mind is with some of these components, the smart components, they can warn of wear, that can compensate when there are issues to make sure that things still keep running as well as possible, but minimize downtime. I mean, you can, and with some of the visibility software packages, some of the things that let you monitor, you can look at your machine and say, okay, I got it. It was running at 1,000 parts per minute when I first started it up, and now it's gone down to 700. And the reason I know that is because I can look at my software and find out, as opposed to just sort of hoping and guessing. But then I can also take a better look and see why. Or I get messages from the hardware itself telling me, you know what, your belts are stretching or whatever. If you're getting more jams, back in the day, things wore, you get more jams that you have to deal with, you get more downtime. With some of these components coming out, you get the warning so that you don't just have to accept that. You can get out there and fix it, and you can do it in an established window where you're not losing the downtime. And again, a lot of this stuff seems obvious, but generally, when it's obvious to you, it's not necessarily going to be obvious to everyone. You want to be making friends with the people who are in the managerial positions, who are the purchasing folks. They're the people you want to say yes to do what's best for the company. So you got to draw these lines for them. You've got to make it really clear and show them the value prop, and do it focusing on the things that have value for them. So what about if you're on the OEM, machine builder, integrator, technology provider side of things? What can you do to help all that happen? Because obviously, if you're, these guys, you want to be selling product. Now, I've talked with a couple of OEMs before who have said to me, we don't, even though we've got the technology, we don't necessarily even put it in the quote because they do not ask for it, and we're afraid if we put it in the quote that we're going to be up above everybody else, and we're not going to go ahead and get the sale. And that's certainly all at risk, but that's where outreach and education is going to start coming into play, and that comes in, with the communications that you make when you're talking with your customers. Something that definitely helps is if you can give them hard numbers, because that was something that I talked to a couple of people from a top tier food and beverage company, and that was one of the things that they kept saying is, give us numbers we can work with, give us hard numbers, give us case studies, projected savings, give me numbers, because I don't have this stuff, and if I don't have it, I can't take it to purchasing and convince them that we really need to have your system. I want your system, but I can't get anybody to buy it for me. So on the OEM slash motion provider side of things, that's where you can really do yourself some good by pulling together those kinds of arguments so that you give them the words, because that was, I think I already mentioned this, but one of the guys I talked with said, as engineers, we're not good at talking. If you give me the words and you give me the arguments, then I can go take them and do some good with it. Otherwise, I'm going to start talking about the technical specs, and I'm going to get real excited about it, and the purchasing people or the top level management are just going to zone out. I'm not going to convince them. So you got to communicate with people. It's kind of enlightened self-interest. You got to communicate with them using what is of interest to them. The real key thing that came across to me talking to a couple of people is they said that at trade shows, everything kind of blurs together. One of the guys said, I go to booth after booth and I see, a bunch of pneumatic cylinders, I see a bunch of drives, whatever, they all look alike, and they all start blurring together. And what I'm really looking for as somebody who's in engineering as an end user is not to hear all about the technology. I want to know how you're solving my problems. I want to know what you're doing. What are you going to do to make my life easier? That's, again, something they can take back home and make their arguments, but that's something that they remember. The brochures and all the tech specs, that's not really going to stay with them. So, talk to them, focusing on what's going to give them the tools they need to go ahead and get your equipment. One of the key things to keep in mind with all of this, and sort of lightly talking about connecting, there are a number of tools out there that I kind of came across when I was flipping around and looking for all of this. Go by the PMMI website. They've got kind of a case book for TCO that goes into a lot of these arguments, that helps make it easier to kind of formulate and have a conversation. And this is something that's been put together by end users, primarily CPG. So they're the people who came together and said, okay, what are the things we need to do to sort of standardize these concepts around TCO. So you might take a look at that. They've got a worksheet that goes through and even looks at it from end user perspective, OEM perspective, and kind of leads you through how to find the right set of talking points to communicate with the different people in your organization so that you can support your arguments to buy the equipment that you need to buy and get the best performance for your organization. There's also some OEE material there. Another place to look at is OMAC has something called PAC Spec, and it's another worksheet type thing that just kind of leads you through how to specify a machine, and again sort of goes through what sort of questions do you ask, what are the things that you need to pay attention to when you're specifying a machine. It's all tools to just make it easier to amass the information that you need to go ahead and make the arguments and get the equipment that your company needs. So anyway, that is what I have on that. Again, pay attention to whom you're speaking with and what particular value props are going to make them pay attention. Use some of these tools. They really do kind of make it easier to figure out how to communicate, how to connect with these people. It's, if depending on what sort of engineering type you are, hanging out with people isn't necessarily the first thing of choice to do, but it's enlightened self-interest. So get out there and communicate.
Thank you, Kristen, for that informative webinar, and thank you to all of our participants today. I want to let you know about an upcoming event, the MCMA Technical Conference, that you may be interested in attending. It is happening November 3rd through 5th in Tampa, Florida, and it focuses on the practical training for motion control and motor technologies. We'll have tabletop exhibits so you can connect directly with the experts from leading motion control and motor companies. Registration is now open and we expect to sell out quickly. You can find all the details on our website, www.motioncontrolonline.org, under the events section. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and an email with a link to the recording will be sent to you shortly. If you have any questions about the presentation material, please feel free to reach out to me or Kristen. Be sure to check out www.motioncontrolonline.org for a list of upcoming webinars and register for our next presentation on October 6th titled Controlling and Synchronizing Industrial Machines Using Real-Time Ethernet. Thank you and have a great day.